Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I'm going to be talking about an issue of language change that tends not to get discussed as much as other things. When people talk about language change, they're interested in big picture things. Can I have a slide, please? You can't see it. These slides are going to be pretty much worthless. But this is the first few lines from Beowulf. What we gardena in jar darum theod koninga thrim jefrunan hutha ethelingas ellen fremedon. There's one word in this that's still current, which is the word in. Way, which is we, is similar in writing but different in pronunciation. And now you can't read Beowulf without special training. You go a few hundred years forward, Chaucer, you can read with a little bit of work. This is the kind of language change that people are interested in. Also, new words, words that people dislike. Who here cares whether literally is used to mean figuratively? Okay. It's all out there. It's been around for hundreds of years. It's not good or bad. It's just there. Does anyone care that OMG or LOL have been entered into the Oxford English Dictionary? Yeah. These are part of the language. You know, if they are being used, they go into dictionaries, and we can study them. But I'm interested in something a little bit different now. I'm interested in how we perceive certain aspects of language, and in particular, how we talk about things that we regard as offensive. Fuck is a very old word in English. It goes back to around the 15th century. The earliest example, can I have a slide, please? The earliest example, and one more, please, is from a poem written in a mixture of Latin and English. And the English words, of this particular line of the poem, are enciphered. You can't really see here, but the word fuck is spelled GXXDDBOV. Where each letter in the English is replaced by the following letter of the alphabet. So instead of F, you have G. It's a very simple cipher to break. But the point of this is that even at this time, this is the earliest example of fuck in any related language. All of the Germanic languages have words that mean the same thing or mean similar things that are related. The earliest of them all is in English. And the very first example we have, we know that it's already a taboo. This sentence, it's a poem satirizing the monks of a particular abbey in Cambridgeshire in England. And this particular line, again, it reads, Non sunt in caeli quia fucant vivis of Haley, where the first part is Latin, the second part is English, where fuck is written in a fake Latin form. And this translates, they, that is the monks of this abbey, monastery rather, they are not in heaven because they're fucking the wives of Ely. The very next line, slide please, uses another now archaic word for sex. Sorry, two more slides please, or thanks. Fratres cum nivis gothabout and suivant menis vivis. That is, monks with knives go around and fuck men's wives, or rather swive men's wives. So this term, for its entire history, has been considered offensive. The question of how offensive it is very hard to know. This is something that's very hard to study. We can go by lack of evidence. We know that literary authors did not use this word. We know that it doesn't show up in formal sources. So we assume that people have always thought it's offensive. But occasionally you do have ways that you can see just how offensive it is. Slide, please. Once more. The School of Venus was a late 17th century work of pornography. Now, the pornographic tradition in English is mostly later, the really hardcore stuff. You have tons from the late Victorian era, but before that you don't have as much. And this is an exception. It's a very rare work, and the author was very interested in language. He spends a lot of time discussing how people used language for sex, the different words they would use, and how they felt about it. And this is great for us, because we can see what people say. So this is, the entire work is presented as a dialogue between a sexually experienced woman and her young niece or cousin. So the older woman says, well, men will do this, and here's what I did once with several men, and it's great, and you should go out and have lots of sex now. And it allows you to have something which is an educational, which goes under the guise of an educational presentation, but is really just porn. But at one point she's discussing, the older woman is telling her niece, about certain words. There are other words which sound better and often used before company instead of swiving and fucking, which is too gross and downright bawdy, fit only to be used among dissolute persons. To avoid scandal, men modestly say, I kissed her, I made much of her, I received a favor from her, or the like. Slide, please. Here's an example of one of the earliest examples of what we refer to as typographical bleeping. This is from a legal case. One of the best sources for information about how we feel about obscene words is the court system, because the tradition of writing down everything that happens in court is in fact a long one, and if cases are about exactly this, you get to see exactly what the issues are. So in this case, it was a sodomy case. A man had sex with another man and was caught or was talking about it and was brought up on charges. And he says, then Rigby, sitting on Minton's lap, kissed him several times and asked if he could fuck him with just F dash. How can that be? You can't. Homosexuality was not. How can that be? You're a man. And they go on from there. Slide, please. This is a great example. The earliest example of the word fuck, the earliest printed example in the United States, is in fact from a legal case concerning a man who was accused of having sex with a horse. So he was brought up on charges. Rather, he sued for slander, and the verdict was overturned. So in the court's account of this, the court wrote, the slanderous charge was carnal knowledge of a mare, and the word fuck was used to convey the imputation. After the verdict for the plaintiff, a motion made in arrest of judgment for the reason that the word used to convey the slander was unknown to the English language and was not understood by those to whom it was spoken. Okay. Fuck isn't in the dictionary. It's not a bad word, right? At this time. Because the modesty of our lexicographers, the court wrote, the modesty of our lexicographers restrains them from publishing these obscene words, it does not follow that they are not English words and not understood by those who hear them. In other words, everyone knows this word. The fact that it's not written down doesn't matter. We all know this. Slide, please. An even better example of the power of these words, the mere fact that you can't use them, okay, we know they're bad, from an 1898 court in Texas, where a man called another man, used the word motherfucker towards him, whereupon the man shot him dead. And the question is, what did the shooter do that was so bad? And the judge instructed the jury specifically, you are instructed that if prior to the shooting of deceased by defendant, the deceased called the defendant a motherfucking son of a bitch, and the defendant shot and killed the deceased, then you are instructed, in such a case, the defendant could not be guilty of a higher offense than manslaughter, if guilty of anything. Call someone a motherfucking son of a bitch, you're the one who's doomed, and that's totally okay. And this is the way it was. This was the power of the word for most of its history. Again, it's been around since the 15th century. For most of its history, as far as we can tell from examples like this was very, very, very bad. Slide, please. I think this is my favorite definition in any dictionary. This is not an example of fuck, but it's an example of the problem of dealing with words of this sort. This is from a dictionary of Argentine Spanish that was published in 1910, and it's defining the word minetero, which refers to a man who enjoys performing cunnilingus. And that's not how the word is defined. The definition here, it says a bit of grammatical stuff and says this is specific to Argentina, and then the quote-unquote definition reads, may my pen resist the urge to write down the meaning of this infamous word. Men and women who use it, men and women who go through the extremes of degradation should define it, since it concerns them. It is known in the capital city. So avoidance is a typical strategy for dealing with words like this. You can't even talk about them. How do we think about it? Slide, please. And what all this goes into, throughout history, different words have been considered at different times. We've been talking so far about sexual terms. we now consider them not as bad as we ever used to. We can use these words. Offensiveness changes. What people think is obscene changes. And my favorite non-linguistic quote from this, from Apocalypse Now: "We train young men to drop fire on people, but their commanders won't allow them to write fuck on their airplanes because it's obscene." So what does it really mean to be obscene? There are different categories of offensiveness. There are different things that we think are bad. Slide, please. Sexual and scatological terms, fuck, cunt, shit, these have been considered bad for a long time in our culture. In other cultures, they're not so bad. It's a commonplace of English slang that we have an enormous number of synonyms for breasts, but in French slang, not nearly as many. They're not obsessed with that aspect of it. Some cultures, they're not bad at all. Words. And in others, they're even worse. So the categories of things relating to bathroom habits, you can't shake someone's hand with your left hand because that's what you use to wipe yourself, which is much worse than we have it here. Religious blasphemy is a long-standing tradition of badness, going back to the very earliest days of English and many other languages, where words like damn and God and blood and wounds were considered very bad. And for other reasons too. It was thought that using words like this would take away God's power or would use God's power by yourself. And from the time when these things start being typographically bleeped, like the fuck we saw earlier, in the 18th century, or late 17th century onwards, again, words like damn, God, zounds, things like that, minced oaths like that. Sorry, we just lost, thank you. Were bleeped in the same way, with the vowels dashed out, with actual civil fines for using words like this. Words insulting someone's parentage, bastard, whoreson, which is now unknown, but in King Lear was an especially bad word. Bastard would often be written in the entirety of the 18th century. Was written B-D. And what we're seeing now is that racial and religious terms, ethnic terms, these are the ones that are considered the very worst. Thanks. So. Right now, if a politician, and they are caught all the time, a politician is caught saying, fuck on a microphone, no one particularly cares. Maybe occasionally there will be some kind of objection, like, oh, he used a bad word, but Cheney called a political opponent, said go fuck yourself on the Senate floor. There was an article about this and a few different things. The Washington Post printed the word, the New York Times wouldn't, even though that's the entire point of this case. But if a politician were to say the word nigger, it would be completely unforgivable. There's no way you can recover from this nowadays. And politicians who said this many, many years ago and are now trying to defend themselves, Southern politicians, they're trying to explain it away, and they're having a great difficulty doing that. Even a few years ago, there was a case where a local politician in Washington, D.C. used the word niggardly, which has absolutely nothing to do with the word nigger aside from sounding like it, and he was forced to resign because of this, just because he used a word that sounded like something bad. So things change over time. This is the way language works. Right now, we are seeing, slide please, throughout the 20th century, we've seen a great increase in the acceptability of using sexual and scatological terms. In the early part of the century, words, we know that fuck was very widely used in the military, for example. There were loads of records at the time. There were court cases talking about that. You start seeing it being openly printed by World War II, let's say. In The Naked and the Dead, Norman Mailer's novel, he had to use the word fug, spelled F-U-G. This was published in 1949, even though everyone knew everyone knew what this word was. And after that, it becomes increasingly more common. The number of uses pick up, the number of examples pick up. It gets printed in places. Harper's Magazine first published it in the 1960s, the New Yorker in the 1980s. By the early 1990s, it started showing up in mainstream newspapers and periodicals. And now it's considered pretty much okay. I mean, it's still a bad word, but it's not the ultimate bad word, not the worst word you can hear. That's the thing that's taking the place of that are the religious terms, the ethnic and racial terms. I'm giving you The point here is that we have no difficulty knowing that different things are considered offensive in different circumstances. I think people don't pay enough attention to this fact, like such and such is always bad. This is true for different kinds of other behavior too, right? You should always eat with your hands, don't put your elbows on the table, don't eat with your hands. Well, I think in many circumstances we know that that's not true, right? If we're at a formal dinner in the White House, yes, you have a dozen forks there, you eat with them very carefully, you don't put your elbows on the table. If you're having a picnic, yes, you eat with your hands, that's perfectly okay. Same thing about clothing. When I give talks, I usually wear a suit. It's not really you can do whatever you want. Not many people wear suits here. I don't need to wear a suit to make the points I'm making. Is a woman's nipple vulgar? Well, in the real world, if it's being used to feed a baby, it's almost certainly not vulgar. If it's being displayed by a stripper, it very well might be. Out here, it's hardly vulgar at all, right? So what are we going to see in the future? This is the big question. It's still, the word fuck is still a bad word. And sometimes when I give talks and I talk about the religious aspect of things, people say, oh, goddamn, it's horrible. I could never say that. Well, yes, in different circumstances, again, people think it's okay. People think it's not okay most of the time if they're in certain religious communities. Most people don't think damn is that bad. You don't have to replace it by darn or something else. Going forward, what we're going to see is that fuck will become even more common. We see even now, in the last 20 or 30 years, the number of phrases and compounds and expressions and proverbs that use fuck has taken off, which is a bit unexpected. I mean, you think now, well, people don't care as much, but we have all sorts of things that are coming out of the woodwork now. If you look at Urban Dictionary under fuck, it'll go on forever for the great variety of things. Of ways that it's used. But it will not lose all of its punch. It's still a bad word, it's still an important word, and we will see it being used out there for a while. There will be more phrases, more uses, and people will still pretend to be bothered by it. It still won't appear that often in the major newspapers unless it's important, unless someone important says it. But it won't bother us too much longer. We will see an increase in the increasing unacceptability of terms that affect people, which, to be honest, I think is a good thing. I mean, this started in earnest in the early 1990s or so with the rise of public interest in political correctness, and the notion that we should care about what other people think. I think this is perfectly fine. We shouldn't use words of hatred unless we really mean them. Expressing hatred is, again, a perfectly good thing to use the language for if you hate someone, but at least know that you're doing it. Don't unintentionally use words that offend people. And we'll progress in this direction for quite some time. Beyond that, it's hard to say. Words, cunt is normally considered the very worst word in English. It's not as flexible as other words. In England and Australia, it's used more frequently. It's used of men towards each other, but it's not as flexible as words like fuck or shit, which have so many uses. So we won't be seeing as much of that, even though it will probably retain its offensiveness. 100 years from now, we can, even though I said so in my prologue that we might know, we don't know what is going to be considered bad then. We don't know what the words that people dislike will be, but we'll just have to wait and find out. So, thank you very much.